G'day everyone. Why I went from an electric mountain bike to a road bike. This video is a comparison of 4 bike types that I bought and sold on my journey to find the right bike. The bikes in order of purchase are a 2019 Giant Trance E+1 electric mountain bike, a 2021 Specialized Stumpjumper Expert analog mountain bike, a 2022 Specialized Epic Evo Expert cross-country analog mountain bike, and finally a Trek Domane SL6 Gen 4 Axis endurance road bike, which is now my current bike. So to put things into context, I currently live on the Gold Coast of Australia. The riding options here include typical roads, concrete bike paths, there's some gravel, some grass, and I've got some dedicated mountain bike tracks nearby. I bought the first bike, the Giant E-MTB, just before the lockdowns of 2020. Prior to this, I hadn't owned a bike for decades. Back then, I rode BMX and wasn't fond of road bikes, which we called racers at the time. The Giant Trance E-MTB I purchased was a full-power mid-range MTB with 140/150 suspension, 80 Nm Yamaha motor, 500 watt battery, all alloy frame and a SRAM GX group set. I chose this bike for a few reasons. Firstly, I needed some rehab for some knee issues I was having, and I thought e-bike could be a good way to go. E-bikes were fairly new then, and there was a lot of buzz. They were in the press. I also had a fondness for my BMX days, and in my mind, mountain bikes were kind of like the adult version of this. The model I bought was heavily discounted, which helped a lot, particularly because at the time E-MTBs were mind-blowing in their prices when they first came out. Initially there were a lot of pros for this bike. The solidity of the product was impressive, it seemed to have no kinks or issues. It made me smile ear to ear for about the first year. I got a lot of positive comments from passers-by and friends. This bike could go just about anywhere, it was like a tank. It looked amazing for its time, in my opinion. It was very stable to ride. In fact, it was so stable, I started filming with one hand while holding a gimbal, which in turn made me start this YouTube channel. Lastly, it was very comfortable to ride sitting upright, and of course the suspension absorbed all the bumps. Over time, some cons appeared. I was constantly replacing parts due to the faster wear and tear issue from having, a motor. The electronics glitched from time to time. I got frustrated with the 25 km/h speed limit, or 15 miles an hour, before the motor cut out. That's what the speed limit in Australia is. Eventually I bought a delimiter, which you could get back then, but that didn't really help. It introduced a new problem, which was it got dangerous. Not only for me, but also others, because I kind of took the speed for granted after a while, and I was flying around everywhere and sort of pissing everyone off. The next con was the rapid evolution of technology at the time, and I saw my bike's value just dropping way too quickly. The bike was 26.5 kilo or 58.5 pounds, and this was killing my back, lifting it into my SUV. I actually bought an expensive e-bike rack just so I could take it to the mountain bike trails nearby. Sadly, the trails nearby kind of sucked and they didn't help, although they're building new tracks now that are kind of flow. More cons. The noisy motor at the time turned out to be no good for YouTube filming, along with the noise from the chunky MTB tyres when on hard surfaces. The riding with one hand thing was disastrous. I had some bad crashes, so I certainly don't recommend that. The battery tech at the time, even after I bought a bigger battery, limited the length of ride to about 4.5 hours back then. I also got a lot of arse pain from the saddle, which obviously can happen on any bike, and I tried changing saddles, but it didn't really help. Finally, the bike didn't really suit the bulk of riding locations that I would actually end up riding, so I decided to sell it before it lost too much value, especially with all the new e-bikes coming out that were better in every single way. This bike did do a great job of fixing my knee issues, but the sheer weight and added costs of owning an e-bike kind of scared me off getting another one. I was also doing more and more road and sort of concrete path riding by that time, So I decided to go for the lightest weight MTB I could afford. This was a 2021 Specialized Stumpjumper Expert. My thinking was that it could be kind of an all-round bike, and that's also how they sort of marketed it at the time. The weight was only 13.8 kilo, about 30.4 pounds, and the spec was mid to high quality with Fox Float 140/150mm suspension, all carbon frame, SRAM X01 drivetrain, and SRAM G2 RSC brakes. I quickly replaced the wheels and bars with carbon to reduce the weight even more, down to 12.65 kilo, or about 27.8 pounds. The pros of this bike, well, it looked awesome, in my opinion. It felt like a high-quality bike, was super quiet, except for the knobby tyres on hard surfaces. The suspension felt plush. It easily handled my main riding locations, which were turning more away from mountain bike and more towards the bike paths and roads and gravel. I could easily lift it into my SUV, although it was a very tight fit being a long bike. It cost less to maintain, in having no motor adding extra stress to the drivetrain, and it was faultless and pretty much super reliable. The cons, well, it was too pingy on my local rough and rooty mountain bike tracks that really required an enduro bike to ride comfortably. It had a slight suspension bob that robbed me of pedalling power on long rides, particularly over 3.5 hours. Now, as I mentioned, it was a long bike, so I had to move my passenger seat forward to fit it in, unless of course I took the front wheel off. So I still ended up using the annoying E-MTB rack that I'd bought. I've mentioned already that I started riding more and more on bike paths, road and gravel, and of course this is not the Stumpjumper's domain, let's face it. I still was getting arse pain, like the previous bike, despite the saddle choice. So around about this point, I started to question my bias toward buying mountain bikes, and the realization of fantasy versus reality was sort of kicking in. I tried a few commuter bikes, some gravel bikes, but still didn't like the harshness given the rough road surfaces where I lived. They kind of felt kind of soulless, if I put it that way. So I decided to go with a 2022 Specialized Epic Evo Expert cross-country race bike. I chose the Expert model due to its light weight at 11.5 kilo, about 25.3 pounds, and luckily there was one in Australia in my size at the time, but only one. This was during the frenzy of COVID when bikes were really hard to get, so I bought it, and luckily I quickly sold my Stumpjumper. The specs of the Epic Evo were 110/120mm RockShox Sid Lux Select Plus suspension, all carbon frame, carbon wheels, SRAM X01 drivetrain, and SRAM G2 RS brakes. I bought faster and lighter tyres, lightweight pedals, and carbon bars, which dropped it down to about 10.65 kilo or 23.4 pounds. Pros. Well, it was easier to lift in and out of the car. It had way faster rolling speed than the Stumpjumper, which meant I could go a little bit longer distance without cramping up. It looked awesome in terracotta sand colour, which was very rare at the time. Strangely, the SRAM G2 RS brakes were no problem compared to the issues from the higher spec RSC brakes on the Stumpjumper. Go figure. The bike was super quiet and premium quality, and it also had longer intervals between maintenance compared to the E-MTB, and a tad better than the Stumpjumper. Cons. The sitting position was less comfortable, because obviously being a cross-country race bike, it has more of an attack than the Stumpy. It was easier to pedal than the Stumpy, but still not great for 4+ hour rides on roads and long bike paths. Sadly, it was way too lightweight to handle my rough local MTB trails, but I kind of knew that. I was still getting arse pain on long rides, and the only other con I can think of was that it's still a very long bike, and I wasn't able to fit it into my SUV without, again, taking the front wheel off, and so I still had to use the mountain bike rack. After owning this bike for about a year, it was time to buy a new car, so I went with a longer SUV so I could fit it in the back without mucking around. But as luck would have it, I also moved into a new building that had a very small elevator. The 760mm wide handlebars and the long bike made it pretty much impossible for anyone to get the lift when I was in it. And on top of that, my new apartment was also smaller internally, and I'll thank the ridiculous cost of housing here in Australia for that one. And about this time, I was now riding exclusively on road and bike paths with some gravel and wanting to go on much longer rides. Endurance bikes had gained mainstream popularity, and I tried some of them out. The problem with this, though, is that even the roads where I live, there are a lot of potholes and a lot of issues, and I really didn't like the jarring feel of road bikes. But these endurance bikes, particularly the newer ones, as a lot of you would know, they have some real-world micro-suspension elements built in. And for me, the Trek Domane seemed to be particularly comfortable and surprisingly smooth. So I sold to Epic and bought a 2024 SL6 Gen 4 Axis. The specs of this bike are rear ISO speed, that's the micro suspension I mentioned, all carbon frame, it's got SRAM rival E-TAP Axis 12-speed drivetrain and SRAM rival brakes. It's not the lightest road bike out there at 8.9 kilo or 19.6 pounds, but it's still a vast improvement over my previous MTBs. The pros of the Domane, well, it cost half the price of mountain bikes for similar quality. It's surprisingly smooth and comfortable for long-distance riding. It's much easier to pedal, allowing for 5+ hour rides no problem. It's a smaller overall bike in size and, of course, drop bars, so it fits pretty much anywhere. It looks awesome, in my opinion. It's super quiet and efficient in changing gears thanks to the electronic group set, and no adjustments are needed. It's surprisingly upright at the sitting position. It can take wide tyres for gravel. There's no expensive front and rear suspension shocks to maintain, except I guess maybe the ISO speed at some point. It's easier and faster to clean versus a mountain bike, which is great for a lazy bugger like me. And thankfully, very little arse pain. I'm not sure why. Maybe it's because, there's a bit more pressure leaning onto the handlebars versus the more upright position of a mountain bike, but I think it's great. So what about the cons? Well, I haven't owned it for that long, but it's certainly not as plush over harsh bumps as an MTB, obviously. There's no chance I'll be hitting the local mountain bike tracks, but as I've explained, I rarely did anyway. At this point, I can't think of any more cons, except maybe the need to recharge the batteries for the electronic drivetrain at some point. On that point, I thought it only had 2 batteries. They sort of market it that way. You've got the front battery and the rear battery. Also, the gear changers on the handlebars take those little watch batteries, one on each, and they apparently only last about a year, so I wasn't aware of that. But oh well, that's how it is. But the best part is I'm now on a bike that suits the actual real-world riding that I do, so obviously much happier, and I've finally stopped getting arse pain. So there you have it. Basically, I'm an idiot that bought the wrong style of bike because I started from a rehab and e-bike excitement point of view. My earlier decisions on what I thought I wanted the bike for didn't match reality. There's a bit of tech evolution in there as well, because manufacturers keep micro-styling bike types to fit exact needs. I wasn't happy with the local rough and rooty MTB trails, although they're now building some flow tracks, go figure. And, I guess I might get another mountain bike in the future, but the issue is now apartments are getting smaller and smaller, so I don't think I can fit them in. But that's my journey from E-MTB to road bike. I hope you've found some value for your own journey. If so, hit me up in the comments. Otherwise, see you on the road.